The Nanovic Forum is a signature event of the Nanovic Institute. It is an annual event. But I would like to point out that this is the second Nanovic Forum this semester, an unprecedented fact owed to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Our first Nanovic Forum in February featured Lord Alton of Liverpool. He talked about genocide. Little did we know that the topic of genocide would be widely discussed with regard to Ukraine just the weeks after Lord Alton's visit. And here we find ourselves in a situation where we know that there is no return to the world we inhabited before February 24th. A special welcome to Anne Applebaum. Anne Applebaum is, as you all know, a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and journalist, author of the acclaimed book Gulag, A History, and author of Red Famine, Stalin's War on Ukraine. In July 2020, Penguin published Twilight of Democracy, the seductive lure of authoritarianism. In this work, Anne Applebaum outlines eloquently why elites in democracies around the world are turning toward nationalism and authoritarianism. That we are honored and delighted to have Anne Applebaum with us. It is her first visit to Notre Dame, and this on the Shirt Day. We are excited to have her experience and expertise as we navigate the intellectual challenge of understanding the political world we are in. Anne just met with Notre Dame students who were inspired by her biography, wisdom, and personality. Welcome to Notre Dame, Anne.
So you have your brilliant questions ready, and I'll keep working on my brilliant answers.
The bar has been set.
The bar has been set very high.
Thank you very much, Clemens, and thank you to the Nanovic Institute. Thank you to all those present here today. I feel at this point I'm in a unique situation because I'm the international lawyer who's asking the journalist and historian the questions. So let me take advantage. 7 days ago, you were in Kiev, and you came out with a brilliant interview talking about the particular situation and the precarity of the situation as President Zelensky sees it at the moment. I think he said at some point that this is a make or break, that they stand to lose everything. We are now more than 6 weeks into this war. Reading your book, it occurred to me, since there's been so much that's been discussed by the Biden administration about how this is a fight between the forces of democracy and the forces of authoritarianism, is this war, Russian aggression in Ukraine, is this the actual twilight of democracy, the culmination of it that we're seeing from your book?
So first of all, yes, thank you for the question. Thank you for the warm reception. I've had a great day here, and I'm really happy that I was able to come. I don't want to describe this as the twilight of democracy, because that then sounds like I'm talking about something that's inevitable. But I do think that what we are seeing is a kind of clash of civilizations, but it's different from the one that was predicted by so many people. It's important to understand that it's not me characterizing it like that. This is how the participants see it. So the Ukrainians understand now in a profound way, especially after the revelations of what has happened under Russian occupation to their fellow citizens, that this is a war for their survival as a nation, as a people, and also as a country that is not just a democracy, but is a country that values personal freedom and values tolerance and values many of the same things that we do. Putin has also been very clear that for him, this is also an existential war. He does see the existence of a sovereign, independent, in democratic Ukraine, a Ukraine that is integrated with Europe and with the world, as a personal threat to him and to his power. He's somebody who, from the beginning of his career, he began his career as a KGB officer in East Germany in the 1980s. He was a witness to the fall of the Berlin Wall. But his vision, his interpretation of that event was not the same that most of us had. We saw it as a moment of great change and optimism, and he saw it as the destruction of a civilization that he believed in. And his goal since then has been to restore the autocratic state that he remembers from his childhood, and he sees Ukraine as, a country that has had democratic revolutions of the kind he lived through in Berlin, It's a country that supports, a set of values that he believes are threatening to him personally. And so it is that kind of war, and that's how the two sides see it.
Let me shift gears a little bit. And one of the things I found very compelling in your book was how you translated, or at least saw the signs, beginning with your own friendships. Many friendships, and I read those with a sense of dread, because it sort of resonated with how we've seen polarization throughout the world. And a lot of people have started thinking along the lines, not of the left or the right, but rather of the patriot versus the globalist. And this notion, even as we see it now in the French elections, there is some attempt to try and paint people who are rooted, who are the, as you point out in your book, the somewheres versus the anywheres. This seems to have more resonance at a time like this. And
yes.
Why would you think that there's more resonance for that kind of divide?
First of all, you should be clear that when I didn't invent that somewheres and anywheres term, and in fact, I'm very critical of it. I do think that one of the reasons that kind of rhetoric is successful is it plays into real fears that people have about real ways in which the world has changed. I do think, and people in this audience will surely know that. I mean, for many people, the speed and pace of economic change, demographic change, kind of sociological change, changes in mores and morality over the last 20 or 30 years has been so fast and so transformational that what it means is that the places that they grew up in, or the towns that they come from, or just the society that they knew as children seem to be lost.
Hence the nostalgia.
So and I should be clear that it is lost. I mean, there are ways of life that are gone and won't come back. I mean, the way you grew up in Poland in the 1960s in a village is not recoverable now. It doesn't exist in that way anymore, because the people who live in that town now are doing different kinds of jobs, because they have iPhones that connect them to international pop culture, because they're part of an international business supply chains, because it's just not the same as it was. And that sense of loss, I think, which is real and has not always been well addressed by politicians, has created this backlash. And the backlash takes the form of I describe in the book as a kind of restorative nostalgia. And sometimes when it's at its most extreme, then I think that desire can become actually rather desperate and despairing. And really, what is radicalism? What is political radicalism? It's a form of extreme disappointment. I mean, if you really, really don't like the society that you live in, and you think that the only way to change it is to destroy it, wreck it, undermine it, then you become a radical. Then you're an extremist. You're somebody who will do anything to change it. And we have evidence of that kind of extremism emerging actually in many places all over the world right now. And I think it's not an accident that it takes similar forms, even in very different places.
On a closing note, you do say in the last few pages of your book that this is a clash of civilizations, and this is a fight for everyone.
I think the lesson is that, one of the things that happened in America in particular, but also in Europe, is that because of our immense success over the last several decades, really since 1945, but also since 1989 and 90, we became complacent, and we began to think that our society, our democracy, our liberal world order are somehow inevitable. That we have achieved something that can't be changed. And the unfortunate metaphor that was often used was the arc of history. That there's an arc of history, it bends towards justice, and this is a famous quote from one of the greatest Americans ever. But it is a misleading quote in the sense that if there's an arc of history and it bends towards justice, then you don't personally have to do anything to make sure we get that justice, because it's just going to happen, because that's how the arc of history bends. And that's not how it works. That's not how history works. Democracy is not inevitable. Autocracy is not inevitable. Everything that happens tomorrow depends on what we do today. And so the decisions we make now will create the world that we are going to live in next. The more people can be involved, whether it's in local politics, local activism, local civic organizations. I mean, it doesn't even have to be explicitly political. The more people are involved in their communities, the more they are connected to organizations that think about these issues, and there are lots of them now. The more that people are able to participate in public life, the better chance we have of maintaining the political system that we have.
You are one of the strongest advocates of Ukraine's victory in this war, and I wonder how you would define such a victory, especially in the present situation.
Actually, this is one of the things that we talked about with President Zelensky last week with my editor in Kiev. And his answer was that Russian society itself needs to change, and there needs to be a different kind of leadership, hopefully one that evokes more feelings of trust among Russians, that helps the Russians understand their past, what the Soviet Union was, and what the real relationships with their neighbors are. So that it is there needs to be not just a change of one leader, but a change of system in Russia, really, to have a kind of permanent peace.
My name is Marco Gorel. I'm a first-year political science student here with a minor in European Studies. I wanted to ask specifically about your article for the May 2022 issue of The Atlantic. You argue essentially that there is no liberal world order as seen by the West's hesitance to substantially back its never again mantra on expansionist powers, but specifically also genocide. So why was it so difficult for Europe and the US to really understand that Russia and China were gaining power, especially through these same ideas? Why wasn't Russia's fighting in Chechnya, Georgia, Syria, Crimea, and well, obviously it's occupation in Crimea, it's fighting in Donbass. Why wasn't that obvious enough for the entire world to see? Why did it finally take clear genocide in Bucha?
Thank you.
Because, as we discussed, to admit that or to say that required very drastic changes. I mean, if you say that Russia is a power that is a grave threat to its neighbors and has genocidal intent in Ukraine, then you can't very well fund the Russian state through buying its gas. And there were simply very powerful reasons why people wanted to continue buying Russian gas. And from the perspective of Berlin or Rome or elsewhere, Georgia is a faraway country. What do we know of the Chechens? Crimea isn't a place we're familiar with. It's, maybe it's Russian anyway. We don't really know its history. We remember the Crimean War, and that was about Russia, wasn't it? And so, and I'm just reflecting what people said. I'm not defending it. And so the saying that this is a real danger and we need to change our behavior and pay a lot of money and act in a completely different way was difficult for many people, and the stakes didn't seem high. They didn't seem important enough up until now. So it's a combination of we have a lot of stakes in the current system, in the current relationship as it exists. Changing that would be very costly. Plus the fear that changing it will bring something worse. If we really push back against Russia, we'll get something even more unpredictable and even more frightening. And actually, that argument is still being made right now. I mean, that's, until this week in Washington, that was probably the most prominent argument against giving heavier arms to the Ukrainians was that. That it would provoke something wider and worse. For a variety of reasons, there now seems to be a consensus that it is possible to do it, partly because the Russians did withdraw from northern Ukraine.
My name is Dara Marie Raghi, and I'm a Master of Global Affairs student at the Keough School of Global Affairs. I believe my question speaks to the call to action where you and Professor Desierto left off. And that question is, in your book, Twilight of Democracy, The Seductive Law of Authoritarianism, you discussed the decline of democracy and the resurgence of authoritarian and illiberal tendencies. Following this year's major humanitarian crisis in Ukraine and its ripple effects on the rest of the globe, Are there any additional recommendations you would add to your book, specifically for world leaders that still believe that they are immune to or shielded from the lure of authoritarianism and its impact on their own democracies? Thank you.
Since the book came out, one of my big projects, it was a cover story in The Atlantic a couple of months ago, was a book about the nature of modern autocracy. Yes. It was, the theme of it was that, we have this kind of cartoon idea of what an autocracy is. There's like a bad guy on top, and then there's the police who work for him, and like maybe there's some good dissidents. And modern autocracy doesn't work that way anymore, because now these different states are interconnected. They're linked through, they have financial links, they have economic links. They learn from one another. The way that the Belarusians put down their street protests was a study for the way the Venezuelans would put down their street protests. They learn from one another, every day. They have ways now also of resisting Western sanctions and Western statements. So, if you sanction Iran, well, then the Russians will go and invest in Iran. If you sanction Venezuela, then the Iranians and the Russians and the Chinese will invest in Venezuela. The West needs to begin to think differently about how it deals with that phenomenon, and just treating it as the phenomenon of this bad leader or that bad guy is wrong. I mean, it's actually a system, and we need to think about it more systematically. And I've written a little bit about just kind of pushing in the direction of what we might do, thinking differently about how we in America and Europe speak to the rest of the world, thinking about how we transmit our ideas, how we spread them, thinking about kleptocracy and how we're actually funding many of these dictatorships, not just in Russia, but in Africa and in all across Asia, changing the way we do business and changing our laws. I mean, a shell company or a tax haven is a thing that exists because of laws that we wrote. We can unwrite the laws. We can make it illegal to hold money anonymously. Or to shield it from the law. We just have to change the rules and make that happen. A third thing is thinking about fossil fuels, quite apart from climate change. The other reason to end our dependence on fossil fuels is that so many autocratic states around the world exist because of them. It's a simple thing. I mean, if you have oil and a small group of people get hold of it, then those people have immense power in a country and they're able to control it. And that's not just Russia, it's Saudi Arabia, Iran, Venezuela, and many other countries. So beginning to think systematically about autocracy in a different way is something that, if I were to write another book, let's say, rather than an extra chapter of this book, that's what I would write about.
Anne, could you give us one last sentence that we can continue our life journey? Just one positive last sentence that we can continue to be human beings?
Everybody run for office.
All right, we take that. We take that.